Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first in a series of lectures on the theme of information. I am Tim Beal. I'm the director of the Baker Nord Center for the Humanities and a professor in the Religion Department. And on behalf of my associate director, Ann Helmreich, and myself, I'm very happy to welcome you all here. This is the first in a series of 3 lectures by our 3 Baker Nord Seminar visiting fellows on the theme of information, and I just want to flag this little flyer for you about these 3 lectures so that you can make sure you make the other 2 as well, which are both in November. We in the seminar have been blessed to have these visiting fellows with us and the opportunity to get to know them and think and work with them. And this is a great opportunity for us to share them with you all. And so we're happy you're here. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce our inaugural lecturer, Professor Avital Ronell, especially after having had some time this week to get to know her personally and enjoy the beginning of a friendship with her. It's an even greater pleasure. I think for many of you, she needs no introduction, but just by way of a couple highlights, she is the professor of Germanic languages and literatures at New York University. She's also professor of comparative literature there. Before her professorship there, she was at Berkeley. Until last spring, she was chair of Germanic languages and literatures, of the Germanic languages and literatures department at NYU. She's had many visiting appointments, most recently at Princeton. She's a regular summer faculty member at the European Graduate School in Switzerland, where she teaches with Judith Butler and Giorgio Agamben and others like that. She has taught seminars and courses with Jacques Derrida and Hélène Cixous, among others. Her books include, most recently, The Test Drive in 2005, a book called Stupidity, 2001, Finitude Score, Essays for the End of the Millennium, Crack Wars, Literature, Addiction, Mania, The Telephone Book, Technology, Schizophrenia, Electric Speech, Dictations on Haunted Writing, back in 1986, and the newest one on its way out now, which I love the title, is The Uber Reader, Selected Works of Avital Ronell. That might be a good place to start. I don't know if you haven't had a chance to read her yet. That's being edited by Diane Davis and is out very soon. So that's all well and good, but given that this is a series on information, I thought that maybe I ought to check some real information sources while preparing my introduction. So I went to Google and Wikipedia, and of course, finally, to that ultimate source, the great river of bookish information, Amazon.com. It turns out that Amazon has run Avital's latest book, The Test Drive, through a couple of its machines to see what information it might give up. And this is what I found there that it yielded. In the visual concordance for The Test Drive, Nietzsche, the word Nietzsche occurs 793 times, whereas God occurs only 88 times. On the Flesch-Kincaid Index, it got a rating of 15. I know, information people, you like real numbers, right? It got a rating of 15.5, which means that there are 93% of other books at Amazon that are easier. The book averages 1.7 syllables per word and 28.4 words per sentence, with a total of 4,138 sentences. It offers 4,498 words per ounce for a value of 3,352 words per dollar. And I did a little of my own math and figured out that that's about 3 1,000ths of a penny per word. So, and that's whether you bought Nietzsche or God. It's the same price. The amazing and wonderful thing about Avital, to me, is that I know she could do something interesting with this little Amazonian information machine. She could help us see it not only as absurd and ridiculous, but also as interesting, maybe revealing something very profound and even disturbing about it and about we who go to it. Indeed, whether Avital is thinking and writing her way into the television or the telephone or whatever, she helps us see the familiar become strange. And in the process, I think she helps us see and hear the ghosts in our machines and the strangers in ourselves. Her topic today is the test drive. Please join me in welcoming Avital Ronell.
I'm very delighted to be here. I'm quite astonished by the warmth and hospitality that you have all shown me. I'm now contemplating nightly Christian's fences, Laura's relation to Foucault and Kant, Michel's sadistic statistics, Brent's critiques of his own project, and the great pleasure that I've taken recently is to reread Tim's book that made such an important impression on a lot of us, The Book of Hiding. And these evenings in the hotel, I was able to reread the chapter on insomnia with a great deal of gratitude. The crew is magnificent, and frames our encounter in ways that we may want to discuss among us. And I also deeply appreciate the communitarian inflection of this seminar. I feel that Arnaud has been very kind to me, and we've talked a lot about Deleuze and Derrida, and I have a sense of where, I think, at least a sense of where people are going, where they may have been, and some of their trajectories, which is very moving and very unusual. Usually you just pop into a place and scram afterwards. So I'm really very, very delighted to be here and thankful for the lovely accommodations as well. It is important and usually undermined to think about the architecture that holds us as we try to talk to each other, and I'm often used to, different types of architectural spaces, including the municipal, degrading, dilapidated kind of neighborhoods that I push myself through with a lot of conviction, of course, but it's also depleting. So, as usual, I don't go to the target of what has summoned me here, but I want to consider some of the presuppositions and what makes it possible for us to even talk about information or deformation or the instability, the necessary instability of transmission systems and problems. So I thought I would roll back to the Nietzschean critique and consider some of the genealogical threads that he creates for us to follow. So I'd like to offer a way of destabilizing the theme that brings us here, which means that you may have to treat this as a kind of rodeo. Just hang on and see how long you can hang on. You can also treat me as a television and pause me and talk and ask questions and start talking at any point. So some of this may not be immediately intelligible, and I'm also, if I may say so, a thinker of the necessity of the unintelligible and the flawed and the breakdown in so-called communication. If we could communicate, we wouldn't need to communicate. So it's very necessary to consider also kind of right-wing ideologies of clarity. Like it's part of the white lie to be perfectly clear, read my lips kind of rhetoric that may sound and resonate familiarly. So sometimes the scratch marks in what I present are so difficult maybe to retain or understand, and that's part of a rhetorical politics that I hope you welcome, and if not, that you listen to maybe as you would to music that sometimes is weird. So today I thought I would present something, again, that it allows for us to discuss, certainly in our seminar tomorrow, but in discussion afterwards here, what in a good old Foucauldian way, what the conditions for the possibility of even discussing information might be. And I thought I would present Nietzsche on American proving grounds. So how Nietzsche migrates to America in certain ways, how Nietzsche reads America, how America reads Nietzsche. So you may want to put on your allegorical ears, because I'm working on at least 6 tracks or registers. Not too bad, I don't think. So let me just begin with a citation from neuromancer William Gibson, of course. Quote, "Wasted a fair bit of patriotic young flesh in order to test some new technology." So, testing 1. We do not always know how to calculate the importance of a work. In some cases, there is nothing even to guarantee that the work will arrive. Some works seem to set an ETA. There is a sense that it will take them years to make their arrangements, overcome the obstacles of an unprotected journey, get past the false reception desks, blocking their paths. In the more assured and seductive version, these works follow the itinerary of Benjamin's secret rendezvous, targeting the geheime Verabredung, so the secret rendezvous, that a work has made with the singularity of a destination, in the form perhaps of a future reader. The reader or receptor from the future assumes the responsibility of being addressed, of signing for the work when it finally arrives, helping it originate. Yet little tells us how many hits a work will have taken on its way, or whether we will be there to receive it. So this might sound a little Star Trek-y at first. Perhaps the work will be prevented from showing up at the appointed time. On the other hand, some works barrel toward their destination, causing a lot of trouble for a lot of Daseins. Heidegger once said that it can take 200 years to undo the damage inflicted by certain works. I think he was evaluating Plato, so thousands of years. For my part, I cannot tell whether the gay science has arrived, or even really where it was going when Nietzsche sent it on its way. Still, I am prepared to sign for it. That is to say, I have prepared myself for it. I am not reluctant to assess the damage for which it still may be responsible, assuming the work has arrived and I can find its point of entry, or whether, but this is not a contradiction, this work has fashioned essential trajectories that provide existence with ever new supplies of meaning. I'm using work here in the widest possible sense because Nietzsche was the absence of the work. So it's a myth that Nietzsche had a work. He continues to pose the dilemma of the most unauthorized of authors, so many signatures, styles, and shredders. Nonetheless, something keeps arriving and returning under that name, something that addresses us with uncommon urgency. So, the gay science. To the extent that science is meant to promote life, Nietzsche makes it his business to put demands on its self-understanding. For Nietzsche, science, or more to the point, the scientific interpretation of life, owes us an account of itself, if only to give us access to its overwhelming use of force over diverse, discursive populations. It would not be stretching things too far to say that in Nietzsche's estimation, science needs to be audited at every turn each year. By the way, Nietzsche's birthday is October 15th. I hope you celebrate. The philosophical pressure is on for science to come clean, to declassify the language usage and rhetorical combinations that have supported the prodigal domination of science over the other interpretive interventions and possible worlds. If Nietzsche wants to keep it clean, this is in part because he needs science in order to make some of his most radical claims. His relation to science is by no means driven by resentment, but rests on appropriative affirmation. Nietzsche says if we didn't have art, which pumped us and primed us for science, we'd all commit suicide. Because art is what already introduces a relation to illusion and fiction and tears us away, disengages us from the tyranny of the truth. Okay? And then science goes on its own tracks with no concern for, at a certain metaphysical level, for truth or its others. Yet it is from a place of exorbitant responsibility that Nietzsche wrote up his version of science, and against the many pronounced inclinations of science, made joyousness, that's why it's the gay science, the joyous, frivolous, frolicking science, a new prerequisite of scientific endeavor. Not one to get tangled in obsolete subjectivities, Nietzsche at times saw himself as a scientific object. Thus, in an effort to explain himself as a prophetic human being, he writes, "I should have been at the Electric Exhibition in Paris as an exhibit at the World Science Fair." Elsewhere, as we know, Nietzsche comes out not so much as a man, but as dynamite. Taking these articulated mutations seriously, one of his masks will have been the scientific object. How can we make sense of Nietzsche's call today? What relation to information or deformation or disinformation does Nietzsche portend? Testing 1, 2. If we are prepared only now to receive his version of the question concerning technology, here I'm referring to Heidegger's important text, The Question Concerning Technology. This is because he ran it along the lines of a delay call forwarding system. He made us wait, holding up the scientific punch he wanted delivered. The call put out by Nietzsche remains the urgent question of a text that bears the burden of an enigmatic encounter with science. Nietzsche gives us science as an assignment, as a trust to be taken unconditionally. Neither the first nor the last to make science part of an irrevocable curriculum, Nietzsche saw in science the potential for uncompromising honesty in terms of understanding who we are and what we can become. At this point, only the scientific interpretation of life is capable, in principle, of zapping those dubious mythologies and bad drugs that keep things hazy, enslaved, grimly pessimistic. On some level, science does not owe anything to anyone. It does not have to bend its rules to suit this or that transcendental power broker. There's a lot in Nietzsche on how God vetoes science, and the great scientist is, of course, Eve, with whom Nietzsche will identify, and who's still punished for her wise-ass scientific inquiry. In principle, science does not have to rhyme with nation, state, or God, but should be able to bypass the more provincial toll booths of ever-narrowing global highways. Science, if it wanted to, could, in principle, travel its zones with a free pass. More imposingly still, science could kick its way out of any religious holding pen and put down deadly fanaticisms in a flash of its idiomatic brilliance. In his rendering and genealogical breakdown, Nietzsche did not mean for science to become a servile instrument of a corporate state, though he saw how that could happen. But when Nietzsche takes on science, commanding its future, Nietzsche had first dibs on at least one or two of the possible futures allotted to the domains of science. He addresses the promise of science according to altogether singular categories, drawing up new amendments to its manifestly powerful constitution. Nietzsche continually offers a model for cognition that cannot simply account for itself or maintain its results within the assumed certitudes of a controlled system of knowledge. At some level, the correlated acts of discovery and invention exceed the limits of what is knowable, or even, as Derrida has argued, strictly recognizable. If there's a true invention, it can't be recognized. It might blow you up, in a sense, cognitively. The meaning of scientificity, which concerns Nietzsche and which can be seen to dominate the technological field in which we moderns exist, embraces the qualities both of destructive and artistic modes of production, involving an ever elusive and yet at the same time tremendously potent force field. Our being has been modalized by the various technologies in ways that have begun fairly recently to receive serious attention in the domains of ontology, ethics, political theory, information theory, cybernetics, critical thought, and artificial intelligence. Yet what concerns Nietzsche belongs neither literally inside nor outside any of these domains, but has nonetheless infiltrated their very core. Something indeed that Nietzsche's gay sigh was first to articulate succinctly. Nietzsche variously motivates the scientific premise of his work by terms that indicate the activities of testing, which include experimentation, trial, hypothetical positing, retrial, and more testing. If anything, gay sigh signals to us today the extent to which our rapport to the world has undergone considerable mutation by means of our adherence to the imperative of testing. The consequences of this grid are considerable, involving, to say the least, our relation to explanatory and descriptive language, truth, conclusiveness, result, probability, process, even identity. Testing, moreover, implies for Nietzsche very specific temporal inflections. Henceforth, everything will have to stand the test of time, which is to say that ever provisional things as well as concepts must be tried and proven and structurally regulated by the destruction of a hypothesis that holds them together. The logic of the living, as much as the inscription of decline, have to go to trial. Later on, we can discuss the democratic implications of this thought. Who'd have thought that Nietzsche could instruct us on democracy? The logic, okay, so if it weren't too explosive, one could say that Nietzsche laid the fundamental groundwork for corroborating Popper's theory of falsifiability. Nietzsche marvels at a science that, like a warrior, can go out and test itself repeatedly. So for Nietzsche, testing means you can discard, you can recant, you can rescind, which is a very new philosophical act of destruction that he affirms. So if you test yourself, there's always a limit that you can overcome and destroy the last results by. If today's world is ruled conceptually by the primacy of testing, nuclear testing, drug testing, HIV admissions, employment, pregnancy, SAT, GRE, MSAT, and DNA, testing limits, testing a state's capacity for justice, as I just read in today's paper, etc., then this growing dependency on the test is coextensive with Nietzsche's recognition of the modern experimental turn. The experimental turn, as we now know it from a history of flukes, successes, and near misses, in its genesis and orientation, travels way beyond good and evil. Its undocumented travel plan, there are so many secret destinations of which we still remain ignorant, is perhaps why experimentation is a locus of tremendous ethical anxiety. No matter how controlled, we cannot know where it is going. You know, we're still discussing whether it's ethical to use the results of experiments in concentration camps, which are still classified. One could argue that nowadays, since the fateful advent of the gay side, but perhaps not solely because of it, there is nothing that is not tested or subject to testing. Let us set up this phase of our inquiry by discussing Nietzsche's unprecedented emphasis on experimentation, which is what I believe provides the crucial access code to the possibility of his gay science, or a gay science. Testing, 1, 2, 3. A vaguely threatening insinuation, the challenge sparked by the utterance, "Try me," could come from any number of places. It could be the case that it speaks from the place of an action hero, a mundane bully, as a girl gang member, a new appliance, a car, or whomever your buffed up interlocutor might be today. In fact, when you hear someone say, "Try me," it is very likely that he's speaking from the essence of technology, a shorthand formula intended to establish a tone of defiance, enjoining the other, bless you, to test a limit. "Try me" may challenge you to see what happens if the line is crossed. It also allows one to encounter the subject on a trial basis. There is something yet to be seen or recanted in the field of the encounter with the other. A call to test the space between us, "Try me," however, soon reverts to a faux experimental generosity. For while it gives the green light to go ahead and probe limits, it switches on the glare of a red light as well, protecting a designated turf. It does both at once, inviting an experimental advance and intimating caution, averting its execution. One throws one's body in the way of an advance. Nietzsche's gesture moves the challenge in a different direction when he invokes "Versuchen wir's." Let's try it. Try me. As if in response to the tapered challenge, his work often says, "Let's try it," or "Let's try it out. Let's give it a try." So the giving it a try is something that turns the trial into a gift. And here I'm considering also, in a condensed form, all of Derrida's immense work on the gift and the gift of death. Turning the trial into a gift, Nietzsche creates a space of recessive limits, at least as concerns dogmatic assertions and cognitive boundaries. He makes his conditions known. In order to earn Nietzsche's praise, a given assertion must be trial-ready, inviting the type of responsiveness that allows for the experiment, what Nietzsche sees as a highly responsible stipulation and structure. Nietzsche, the thinker of the test site, from the selective test of the eternal return to Zarathustra's trials and the experimental language shots of the aphoristic texts. The word essay also means to try and trial, put on trial, to essay something. Insisted on these very conditions. Nietzsche insisted on these very conditions. Versuchen wir's circumscribes the space of an unceasing series of audacious experiments. Here's Nietzsche. "I would praise any skepsis to which I am permitted to reply, 'Let us try it.' But I do not want to hear anything anymore of all the things and questions which do not permit of the experiment. For their courage has lost its rights." So for Nietzsche, the experimental disposition is about courage. Under the flag of courage, Nietzsche henceforth closes his ears to anything that disallows experimental probity. One could argue that in Human All Too Human, Dawn, and the Gay Science, Nietzsche sets up a lab in which he performs the countless experiments on which later theories might be built. Each aphorism is set up as an experiment to be tested, observed, and where necessary, rescinded. Performing a kind of anti-sublation, rescindability is the true test of courage. Where Hegel might gather and hold an Aufhebung, or sublation, Nietzsche, in and on principle, discards let's go. His work depends on the bounce of rescindability, on the ability to mourn that which cannot prove or seriously legitimate itself. Such acts of letting go have nothing to do with wimping out or with simply betraying what has been. Instead, they provide a way of articulating the enhanced capacity to take the cuts of criticism, basing nothing on faith or mere durability. It is a mark of vitality that points to the minimally paranoid path, if that should be conceivable, of scholarly pursuit. So Nietzsche, like Flaubert, says, no conviction. I'm going to proceed. I'm not going to hang on to something I think is a truth or might work. I'm going to be prepared to let go of it and to mourn it. So this is something that I think changes the path of philosophy and technology. The demands put to us by Nietzsche in the articulated forms of the autobiographical traces, as well as the various inscriptions of his thought, prompt a number of questions. Sometimes the questions that he makes us ask evoke the quality of something like an unthought layer of sketches, he proposes. For as much as he thematizes it explicitly, he also appears to take testing's pervasive pull for granted. So some of the questions that he makes us ask is, what finally is the nature of the test? Does it have an essence? Is there an essence of the test or testing? Is it pure relationality? How does it participate in Nietzsche's great destabilizations or prompt the nihilistic slide of values? Why today is our sense of security, whether or not we are prepared to admit this, based on testability? There's a desire to have everything and everyone tested. And I'm not unaware of the sinister resonance of this observation. But since when has a desire signaled by humanity not been pulled by a sinister undertow? Testing, which our Daseins encounter every day in the multiplicity of forms already enumerated, ranging from IQ to cosmetics, engines, stress, and arms testing 1, 2, 3 broadcast systems, not to mention testing your love, testing your friendship, testing my patience, in a word, testing the brakes, was located by Nietzsche mainly in the eternal joy of becoming. Becoming involves the affirmation of passing away and destroying, the decisive feature of a Dionysian philosophy. I'll just read a few more pages so that we can then have a discussion. Testing, which we read as one of the prevailing figures of our modernity, still makes claims of absoluteness. Something has been tested and proved. We have test results, but this absoluteness now comes in the form of temporariness. It opens up the site that occurs, Nietzsche suggests, after Christianity has fizzled, arriving together with a crisis in the relationship of the interpretation to experience. So there's a crisis of the relationship of interpretation to experience. No longer is it a question of interpreting one's own experience as pious people have long enough interpreted theirs, namely as though it were providential, a hint, designed and ordained for the sake of the salvation of the soul. All that is over now, says Nietzsche. Now we godless ones test, we rigorously experiment. We are the Christian conscience translated and sublimated into a scientific conscience. Converted to scientificity, we still, however, carry a trace of Christianity, because what triumphed over the Christian God was Christian morality itself, the concept of truthfulness that was understood ever more rigorously. As it became more refined, Christianity forced intellectual cleanliness upon us. This would be Nietzsche's view, that Christianity, in a sense, installed in itself a kind of rigor that was going to necessarily crash against its walls of dogmatism. So it came clean by pushing science as the sublimation of its own murkiness. Now man's conscience is set against Christianity. It is considered indecent and dishonest by every more refined conscience. The Christian God in some split off from Christian morality, which necessarily went down a transvaluating path less traveled, and turned against its recalcitrant origin. The Truth March required Christian morality to give up the God. What interests me is the additional twist of transvaluation that Nietzsche's shadow history sketches, namely, when the value-urging truth converts into the currency of testing. Henceforth, in strictly Nietzschean terms, reactive positings will have to stand up to the scrutiny of recursive testing. With the spread of technology, testing lost some of its erratic and exceptional qualities and started hitting everyone with its demands. That is, anyone who wanted to gain admission anywhere, and all institutions started testing to let you in and let you out. If something weird happens, you are taken in for psychiatric testing. Technological warfare belongs to the domain of testing as well, and does much to support the thesis that there is a little difference between testing and the real thing. To the extent that testing counts as warfare today, in today's paper, Korea is testing, and this requires some hermeneutic intervention. Is Korea's testing nuclear weaponry the real thing or a test? How to read a test, and so on and so forth. Politically, what are the implications? To the extent so that testing counts as warfare today, it marks the steady elimination of boundaries between weapons testing and their deployment. The test already functions as a signal to the enemy other. What this means, among other things, is that the Cold War was a war. It also means that W could at once invoke and scramble these codes by announcing on the eve of 9/11 that the attack on the World Trade Center was, in his words, a test. So the president came out on the evening of 9/11 and said, our nation is being tested. So how does his language at that moment of crisis, how does his language usage work here? Appearing to introduce a new rhetoric of justification for imminent military action, the president in fact reverted to a citation of pre-technological syntagms that captured the erratic pull of the test. In this context, the term sparkles as an anointment. The president bears the mark of election by virtue of the test. If a few months earlier he was elected by dubious political means, he is now elected by divine mandate to meet the demands of a terrific test in order to create history, which he begins to do by reinscribing the Crusades. Saying that the terror attack was a test, President Bush leaves no room for the undecidability of Abraham, the contestability of Job, or the intricated martyrdom of Christ in the desert or on the cross. Disturbing the codified usage of the trial to which the test alludes, the utterance subverts the condition of being tested by offering that, at the moment of its mention, the test has been passed. The test will already have made sense and turned in the result. One would not have been chosen to withstand it, the logic goes, if one had not already passed the test of history and countersigned, in this case by God. So when Bush says we are being tested, he reverts to a biblical language and tradition, and his sense of the test therefore means in uttering that we are being tested, he's already passed the test. He's been elected, anointed, so that this nation has passed the test. whereas the Nietzschean and other thinking of tests require an open relation to a kind of open infinity, or what I was calling undecidability. Reinscribing and repeating the wars of his father, this little Isaac Bush jumps at the chance to return to traumatic sites. Like Isaac, neutralized and silenced by the father's package deal with the sacred, this one wants to dig into the earth, signing a legacy to which he was and was not called. A lot of my work has to do with whether you know you're receiving a call and what it means to be uncalled or not called, but still jump up and think you're the elected one. Part of the vision thing that we call testing, the first Gulf War was conducted primarily as a field test, but it also phantasmatically displayed the characteristics of a national AIDS test in which America scored HIV negative, owing to the bloodless and safe war. The Gulf War set out to prove the hypothesis that no technology will ever exist without being tested. But once it is tested, we are no longer simply talking about a test. Nothing will be invented, no matter how stealth, nuclear, or unthinkable, that will not be tested. That is, at some level of calibration, realized. Hence, in addition to related issues of deployment, testing is always written into treaties. The necessity of treaties, conventions, and regulative discourse in itself underscores, in the manner demonstrated by Kant and Benjamin in their critiques of violence, the extent to which testing, like war, has become naturalized and can be only provisionally suspended by treaties that try to ban them. So at this point in what I was preparing to discuss with you, I wanted to show how Nietzsche slides and migrates into America, and how America becomes the test site par excellence for Nietzsche, and why, and how America is a place he predicts where actors will one day rule. And there's some very Californian moments here. There's also, you have to remember that Nietzsche, when I say transvaluates, he has a machine that affirms and is destructive of the very utterances that he puts forth. So being an actor or a role player for Nietzsche is also something to celebrate, because if you can fictionalize and produce different masks and selves, you're already on the level of art and science to a certain degree. For Nietzsche, the role players, which is to say those who had to go with the flow and who do not drop anchor in a kind of essence of identity, they're the Jewish people. They've had to tuck and roll, move, go with the flow, change personalities and identity papers, and they're able to do this, and Nietzsche praises them for this. At the same time, one grows into one's mask in a way that privileges becoming and changing and producing, proliferating personalities and possibilities and trajectories, and there's no longer faith in kind of monumental architectural projects, because there's such a fast turnover of who you can be in your becoming. So there's no longer a kind of commitment to the future or plans that would be transgenerational. So who today, says Nietzsche, would plan for the future and truly be committed to the future of generations that we can't even imagine? So he predicted a lot of things via some of his notions of experiment and testing, and this is where the paper would have gone, but I would like to invite you to make your own interventions and comments, and they don't have to be in the undeconstructed form of Q&A. You can just have something to say that does or does not ask for a response, and may ask for a response from the future and not from whatever position I'm pretending to occupy here. So thank you for your attentiveness. I was very sensitive to it. It's this hard stuff, and I appreciate that you're letting me speak to you. And some of this stuff is also, of course, very controversial. So let me explain one thing, that one of my decisions to go with Nietzsche is because I do feel that it's necessary, especially today in this very depleted historical moment, to go to the limits of what a consensus would hold as decent. I think one has to travel to those frontiers and ask very aggressive, difficult, incorrect kinds of questions. So it's not easy. Nietzsche himself was a polite and modest person. I would say I am too. So it's not easy to produce the effect of a rant or a rigorous denunciation.